أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد صلى على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يشري نفسه ابتغاء مرضات الله صدق الله العلي العظيم. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, salamun alaikum jamiyan wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: how does one measure the leadership ability of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Keep that question in the back of your mind, inshallah, we'll return to it. When we look at the personality and the persona of the likes of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the magnanimity of Ali ibn Abi Talib, where does one begin? Does one begin from the very first moment of his life? Does one begin with the middle of his life, with the end of his life? No, with what attributes and with what traits does one begin? Do you begin with his poetry and his eloquence or the poetic writing and rhetoric? Do you begin with his justice and leadership? Do you begin with his bravery on the battlefield? At what moment and at what point do you begin in this analysis and looking at this personality of this grand person? Edward Gibbon, in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the great historian, when he was analyzing the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said this person brought together the traits of a soldier, the traits of a poet, the traits of a saint, all together in one individual. This was the personality from the viewpoint of Gibbon. And he said the Holy Prophet of Islam was never deprived of a genuine and generous friend from his start of his mission until the end of his final burial rites. Ali ibn Abi Talib was with him at every moment in time. This Aaron to that Moses. This is the words of Gibbon. And we highlighted the words last night of the professor of Semitic languages at Princeton University, Professor Philip Hitti, where he was saying that Ali was that individual who, in terms of his valor and valiance on the battlefield, was second to none. He was valiant in battle, and he was eloquent in speech, and wise in counsel, and true to friends, and magnanimous to his foes. And despite this, he was also that individual who had the true traits that were most cherished in Arabia amongst all of the people: nobility and chivalry in one. And he further says, with respect to this personality, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he's that Solomon of the Arabs. Sulaiman alayhi salam, who is revered in the Bible as Solomon the Wise, the one of wisdom. He says, this Ali is the Solomon of the Arabs, that individual around whose personality you notice that countless poems, proverbs, sermons, anecdotes have emerged around the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib. These are the words of Professor Hitti at Princeton University. When we go further, the individual by the name of Khalil Gibran, the famous Lebanese Christian poet, the Lebanese American Christian poet, who has written The Prophet, who after Shakespeare and after the Bible, his works are the most selling and the most famous in the history of the world. This great thinker, this great writer comes forward and he says that it is in my belief, his belief, that Ali was the first Arab to have a conversation with the universal soul, referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the universal spirit of existence. And he said he died a martyr of his greatness while prayer was between his two lips. He said the Arabs, his view, the Arabs did not realize his value up until that moment. Then amongst them came their Persian neighbors who were able to tell the difference between gems and gravel. That people who did not even adhere to Islam understood that Ali was someone special. Ali was someone not to be taken for granted. Ali was someone who was ahead of his times. Therefore, In tonight's discussion, I want to look at Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, from the lens of not just the lens of, for example, the Islamic lens, not just the Shi'i lens, not just the lens of, for example, Amir al-Mu'mineen for you and I, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful. Yes, all of that is there. Yet, yes, all of that is true. But I want to look at this Amir al-Mu'mineen from the vantage point, from the perspective of leadership, from the perspective of guidance for humanity in our world. Our world today seems to be starving for leadership, for just leadership, for true leadership, for honest leadership, for leadership with integrity, for leadership that makes sure that no one is marginalized in society, that every individual, their right is maintained and their right is observed. And in order to understand this, where do I start? Where do I begin? Because this was the view and this was the vantage point of secularists, of Orientalists, the likes of Gibbon, the likes of Professor Hitti, the likes of Khalil Gibran. But when I come to my own vantage point and my own belief system, what do I hear with respect to what Rasulullah is attributed to have said with respect to Amir al-Mu'mineen? He says, Ali, with respect to Ali, Rasulullah says that whoever wants to see Adam in his knowledge, whoever wants to see Nuh in his piety, whoever wants to see Musa in his power and his grandeur, whoever wants to see Isa, and whoever wants to see all of the prophets, he's therefore verily saying, فَلْيَنْظُرَ إِلَى وَجْهِ عَلِيِّ ibn Abi Talib. That just look towards the face of Ali ibn Abi Talib. This grandeur, that all of the virtues of the prophets are encapsulated in the being in the persona of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Attach in your heart the love of this individual, not for any reasons. We will give istidlal. We will give proof and evidence with respect to this. How is it that I should take Ali as my leader, and why should I take Ali ibn Abi Talib as my leader? That is our conversation for tonight, inshallah. The first point I want to look at is, do we keep Ali ibn Abi Talib limited, for example, to a Islamic Shi'i leader, or is he much greater than that? And research must be done on this topic to look at it. I want to look at why did the Imam alayhi salam move the capital to Kufa, and what lessons this can give you and I in our lives to understand how forward thinking was the Imam alayhi salam. I want to look at, for example, what were the traits and the philosophy that the Imam was operating from. He had a political economic philosophy with respect to how to rule and how to run society. What was that political economic philosophy? And then I want to look at how did he actually live in his life, and how was he the father of the orphans, making sure that who were those people who were looked after in society? Was it the wealthy? Was it the elite of society from a financial and material standpoint? Or was it something else that Ali ibn Abi Talib's eyes were on? What was he looking at? And what was happening on the night between the 19th and the 21st? What was going on in the household of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam? This is our schedule for the night, inshallah. Keep these points in your mind, inshallah, as we proceed. When we look at the history of the 20th century and you look at what happened, there was a monumental moment in the middle towards the later period of the 20th century. There was a strife, there was a tussle, there was an argument, a fight at odds between two ideologies. The ideology of capitalism on one hand, the ideology of communism on the other. I bring this up because these are political economic philosophies and they have an impact on society. With respect to this movement of communism that arose, it caught fire, of course, in Russia, but not only in Russia, in Cuba, as well as the Middle East, in Iraq, for example, in people in, for example, many Middle Eastern countries. It caught hold in India. It caught hold in, for example, Pakistan. You found people who were empathizers with the communist movement across the globe. Now, in the monumental fatwa from the prestigious and the immense Ayatollah Sayyid al-Hakim, Muhsin al-Hakim, may Allah bless his soul, he categorically ended the confusion that was in the minds of the people with respect to this by saying that this was not to be accepted. The idea that communism, one element of it being against religion, is not acceptable. And therefore he proceeded and he came forward and said that this is not acceptable. However, one element of the equation of the views of many people who adhere to this ideology or this philosophy, and even people who are opponents to the viewpoint of communism, for example, understand that in terms of the theory, Karl Marx in theory, had elements and points that were fair and right. That society was no longer fair, that there was a wealthy class system and there was the haves and the haves nots. And society should not be that way. And he had diagnosed many of the problems accurately. But his prescription, the solution that he was providing, was not accurate and was not effective. So to remove religion, that's not a valuable solution. To come forward and say that, for example, that this is what we're going to do, and we're going to put all of these things in the hands of a few, and they're going to give it equally to people. Well, those people have to be fair. Those people have to be equitable. But what was the underlying theory? That even many people who are Muslims became indoctrinated by this philosophy. The question that they would ask is, if the Holy Prophet was here, and he could only pick between these two philosophies of political economy, capitalism on the one side, where they would argue there's haves and have-nots, and on the other side you have the communist view that everyone is equal, at least in theory. Well, there's no way that the Prophet would fight for capitalism. He would definitely fight for communism. This was their argument. Now, of course, Rasulullah would never be against religion. He was an establisher of religion and all of those points. But just focus on this for one moment. Keep this in mind. Now, who was in the view of the Prophet, in the view of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, in terms of who are they focused on society? Were they focused on the elite in terms of finances, in terms of material gains? Were they focused on the wealthy? Or were they focused on the most downtrodden in society? Keep that question as we move forward in the back of your mind. Islam also has a view with respect to how one should run society. And we need to start taking those views of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Rasulullah seriously and have studies conducted on them. Why? Because I come to this very, very, very important question with respect to Amir al-Mu'mineen. You will find that Ali ibn Abi Talib, as Rasulullah, was looking at the most downtrodden, the most marginalized, the people who are at the lowest rung of society, and making sure that they were taken care of and establishing justice for those individuals. At the same time, they were not stopping, rather they were encouraging others who had the ability, who had the know-how, who had the hard work and ethic to build farms, to build agriculture, to build streams, to build canals, to develop this society. There was no stopping businessmen. Amir al-Mu'mineen himself, in his 25-year period, many times we say Ali ibn Abi Talib was just sitting at home. No, he was writing a tafsir of the Quran, for example. He's compiling the Quran, a tafsir of the Quran. On top of that, he was making sure that he was building his wealth, not to spend on himself, but rather in Usul al-Kafi, in the book of economics, in the section on economics, you will find a very clear tradition where Ali ibn Abi Talib used his own money. That same Ali ibn Abi Talib, who would never use a dime of the people's money, he's freeing 1,000 slaves with his own money. That means that the way Ali ibn Abi Talib understood wealth and the way that sometimes we understood may be very different. Ali ibn Abi Talib understood that this wealth was a vehicle to achieve the akhirah, the hereafter. And that's perhaps how we should look at it. Not rather as a vehicle to just make our dunya only. Understanding how Ali ibn Abi Talib thought can help us actually have better lives for ourselves, for our families, for our nations, for our civilizations. So number one, why did Ali ibn Abi Talib, in the first step of trying to understand Ali ibn Abi Talib's leadership, why did he move the capital from Medina in Hijaz towards Kufa in Iraq? This is something that many people have taken a very surface level analysis of this matter. For example, Professor Al-Ghadeer has looked at this question with his colleagues, and when he looked at this, he analyzed a few different scenarios with respect to why Ali ibn Abi Talib moved the capital. One argument that he makes, who of course is not from the Shia school of thought, he says one reason as to why Ali ibn Abi Talib moved the capital from Medina towards Kufa in Iraq. He said number one is that the people of Iraq, especially the people of Kufa, assisted in the Battle of Basra, the Battle of the Camel, and therefore Ali ibn Abi Talib wanted to win their allegiance. He wanted to win their favor, and therefore he moved the capital. Ya Allah. Amir al-Mu'mineen, that Ali ibn Abi Talib, who on the basis of principle never wanted to win anyone's favor, to the extent that many people who criticized Ali ibn Abi Talib, they said that if Ali had just been flexible in a few things here and there, if he had just given a position to Amr ibn As here and there, if he had just given a position to Talha and Zubair here and there, if he had just given a little position to some of these people, many of this bloodshed would not have happened. This Ali ibn Abi Talib will try to win favor with someone and try to do political favors. Nonetheless, this is one argument that they made. The other argument that they made was saying that he wanted to protect the sanctity of Medina. He wanted to make sure that there had been bloodshed in Medina, that we should not have this, and therefore he moved it. This may be perhaps plausible. We'll come to this in a moment. The other element with respect to Ali ibn Abi Talib that people who have researched this matter, Orientalists, academics have said, is that he wanted to make Kufa something that is the capital because he wanted to make it more central. The Islamic Republic had expanded. It was no longer just in Hijaz. It was no longer just in Medina. It was no longer just in Mecca. It had expanded outward. And now that it expanded towards Egypt and towards, for example, Iraq and towards, for example, Rome and all of these regions, it needed to be more central. This is going to be an important point that one should consider. Keep this one especially in the back of your mind, the centrality of the capital and Amir al-Mu'mineen's move, and how that relates to you and I, and how we view Ali ibn Abi Talib as a leader and as someone who has this trait of forward thinking and visionary in terms of his status. I say this because what is our view on this? And how do we actually analyze the way Ali ibn Abi Talib made decisions? Well, look at this. And the fourth view with respect to these scholars was that he wanted to keep an eye on Muawiyah. That's why he moved from Medina to Kufa in Iraq. And so he could be closer to Sham, where the Umayyads were. This was the fourth reason. Of course, this is something that Ali ibn Abi Talib himself, we know very clearly, that he stated in his own words, Amir al-Mu'mineen, that I know how to plot and I know how to be shrewd and I know how to be sly much better than the likes of Muawiyah and the likes of the Umayyads. But I don't, because my principles do not allow me to transgress the bounds of Islam the way that they did. So this Ali ibn Abi Talib, this fourth option is not one. The third one is one that I want to highlight in particular, which is the movement from Medina to Kufa in order to establish an environment that is more central. Could this have some basis? And perhaps we need members from our communities to research and study international affairs, to study governance, to study leadership from the vantage point of Amir al-Mu'mineen, so we understand how forward-thinking this person was. A study conducted at Harvard University in the year 2012 looked at, is there any connection between the geographic distribution, the population density of a state in the United States of America and the capital of that state and its relationship to corruption? Allow me to rephrase one more time. In the United States, for our audience in the United Kingdom and other parts of the world outside of the United States is comprised of 50 states. Those states combined together create the United States of America. Each state within the United States of America has a state capital. The same way that the whole country has a national capital of Washington, D.C., each state has a capital, such as Florida, Tallahassee, such as New York, not New York City, but Albany, for example, such as Illinois, Springfield, such as California. The capital is not Los Angeles. The capital is not San Francisco. The capital is Sacramento. All of these states have their own capitals. And what the researchers at Harvard wanted to look at was, is there any impact? Is there any connection, any correlation between where the population of the state lives generally and where the capital is of that state? So for example, where is New York City, which is where the majority of the people of New York live in and around, and where is the capital of New York State? You will find there's quite a distance. For example, this example of Florida. Where do the majority of people live in Florida, the state of Florida? They live in South Florida predominantly. And for example, some may say Central Florida and, for example, Tampa and the greater area. But where's the capital of the state? The capital is very far from the general population. It's in the northwest. I say this because the researchers found very interestingly that those states that have a not centrally located, or rather they have a capital which is away from the general population, they notice that there is a higher rate of corruption in those states. For example, which states? For example, New York and Florida are consistently found to be two of the most corrupt states according to convictions based on corruptions of political officials. Furthermore, the researchers found that those states in which there is a big gap between the general population and the state capital, you will find that for numerous reasons, for reasons such as the local news does not focus as much upon the state capital because it's far away. This was one element. They found beyond that that the expenditures, the expenses that states such as New York, such as Florida, such as California, where there is a gap between the general population and the state capital, those locations, the public officials spend more money on average on expenditures relating to their own office as compared to money spent on the general population. But did we look at and did we analyze this from the lens of when Ali ibn Abi Talib said this and did this action? Did members of our community, did we go forward and research this in academia? Perhaps some did, perhaps others didn't. But why did it take until 2012 at Harvard for someone to come forward and realize that Ali ibn Abi Talib is maybe have been a trailblazer? They didn't make the connection. I say this because I have a thesis here that Ali ibn Abi Talib is a world figure, a universal figure that must be known not only to you and I, but must be known to all Muslims, no, to all Christians, no, to all Jews, no, to all people of all faith, regardless of faith. The world is starving for leadership like Ali ibn Abi Talib. And it's our responsibility to try to get the knowledge, the intellect, the thinking, the rationale, the insights, the rhetoric, the eloquence of Ali ibn Abi Talib in the heart and minds of all people. I highlight the United Nations 2002 United Nations Arab Human Development Report that cited Ali ibn Abi Talib's thought in terms of his relationship on knowledge, where he highlighted and he stated with respect to knowledge, you should understand that every vessel becomes filled except the vessel of knowledge, Ali ibn Abi Talib says. So therefore he emphasizes the focus. He says when it comes between wealth and knowledge, always focus and emphasize on knowledge, because knowledge is that thing which protects you, whereas wealth you have to protect it. That doesn't mean don't focus on wealth, but if you focus on knowledge, you will get both as a byproduct of that. I say this because Warren Buffett, as an example, one of the wealthiest people in the world, who's always at the top of the list of wealthiest people, people say that he's an investor of this caliber and that caliber, and they say, for example, he understands the markets. But one thing that he mentions that many people don't highlight is how important knowledge is. That knowledge is more important than any of the wealth that he's accumulated. Because all of that wealth, that if it's taken away overnight, he still has the knowledge to be able to build up again. That's what knowledge does. That it's only because his partner, Charlie Munger, says it's only because of that 5 hours that this man studies every day that we're able to be the best, most successful firm in the world. That he said that knowledge compounds the same way that interest compounds. Focus on knowledge. Ali ibn Abi Talib is telling you and I to focus on knowledge. But in his governance, the same UN report highlights that he says that anyone who wants to lead must first implement upon themselves the traits of leadership and also the justice, and be that person who they aspire society and others to be. And he says to Malik in his famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar, he says to him and he writes to him that I want you to make sure you are more concerned with the development of the land first before collecting the taxes. Yes, collect the taxes, but make sure that you don't collect the taxes and focus only on that without developing the land. Because how are people supposed to give taxes if you don't develop the land? If they don't have income, if they don't have their agriculture growing that they can sell in the markets, for example. It is only by means of the development of the land that you are able to collect the taxes. He said anyone who focuses only on collecting the taxes and doesn't develop the land, they destroy the nation and the people. Ali ibn Abi Talib highlighted that he's moving the capital. Yes, indeed, he wanted to protect the sanctity of Medina as well. He had no concern of the acts of Muawiyah necessarily. He had no concern, for example, of what was happening or what will happen with respect to what people will say about him. And he didn't want to keep an eye necessarily on Muawiyah. What he wanted to do was to protect the ummah, was to protect the nation. That's the focus of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Therefore, research has been conducted at Harvard that looks at and analyzes that as there is a general population shift, the majority of a state, the majority of a country is away from the general population, from the state capital, then corruption increases. Why? Because oversight decreases. People feel lazy, they feel lethargic. They say, if the capital is so far, then why should I go? It's going to be such a hassle. And what if I don't get justice? On top of that, it's a waste of time. So Ali ibn Abi Talib perhaps wanted to move the capital from Medina towards Kufa so that somebody who's close to Kufa, somebody who's more centrally located, they don't feel that I couldn't get to Ali ibn Abi Talib. I couldn't get to him. Therefore, I wouldn't get justice. Ali ibn Abi Talib sought and fought for justice at every moment. For who? For the widow, for the orphan, for the poor, for all of those people who are marginalized in society. How? We're told there's a moment in time where Ali ibn Abi Talib is in Kufa. When he's in Kufa, he's right by the Darul Amara. This is the state capital, if you will. When he's by the Darul Amara, he used to have a place which was right outside. It was right by the door or one of the walls of Darul Amara that had some shade. It had some covering from the sun. And he sat there so that he could be accessible to the people. When he sat there in order to be accessible to the people, one day a young lady comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen and says, Ya Ali, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I am in need of assistance. I need your help. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, what happened? He says, I have a complaint. Who do you have a complaint against? I have a complaint against my husband. What did he do? What happened? He is someone who's shouting at me, who's become enraged with me, and he's threatened to kill me. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, wow, he's Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's the one who's establishing justice on earth, Allah's justice on earth. At that point in time, Amir al-Mu'mineen does something perhaps to illustrate to you and I a point, not for his own meaning, for any of his own reasons. He says that it's very hot right now and the sun is out. Let's let the sun go down a little bit and then I'll go with you and then we'll solve this problem, no problem. At that point in time, of course, you and I know that Ali ibn Abi Talib is that individual who would never delay for even a moment justice, and he would never stop, and he would never stop himself and rest for a moment and allow oppression to continue. At that moment in time, the lady says to Ali ibn Abi Talib, according to this narration, at that moment she says, Ya Ali, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I am afraid that if it becomes too dark, he will get even more upset and more enraged. And therefore, I don't want to go back later. Amir al-Mu'mineen, the tradition at this point in time, looks down and he begins to speak to himself. He says, surely, Ya Ali, you will not allow for injustice to continue for even one moment while you are alive. And you will not remove fear from the heart of the oppressed and delay that moment for even a second. Amir al-Mu'mineen saying that one of the jobs of the rulers is to remove oppression and fear of oppression and tyranny from the hearts of the people. That one should not be afraid of others, that one should feel as in an environment of safety, of security. Ali ibn Abi Talib begins to have this conversation and he stands up and he says, let us go at this moment in time. This was just to illustrate to you and I, Amir al-Mu'mineen is much above this conversation with himself. At that point in time, they proceed towards the house, we're told. When they proceed towards the house of this man, when they get closer towards the house of this young man, of the wife's house, they get closer. When they get closer, Ali ibn Abi Talib, according to the narration, he's older at this time. His beard is white, and he's not what people had known him to be. He was not described as what people had described him to be. When they get to the house, at that point in time, the owner of the house, the young man, comes out. At that point in time, he sees his wife with this older man. When he sees his wife with this older man, some people have this rage problem and they're not able to control it. May Allah protect us all. I say it to myself first and to all. At that moment in time, we're told that he saw the man and he became enraged. And he began to address his wife. You brought someone to try to deal with me. You brought another man to try to come against me. You brought another man to try to fight me. And he became enraged. And at that moment in time, he drew his sword and he began to proceed forward. At that point in time, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Imam al-Mu'mineen, he says, he tries to calm the situation down first. And he first begins to say to the young man, he says that, is this your wife? He says, yes. He says that she has a complaint against you. He said, what is it? That you get too angry at times, you threaten her, and in fact, you have threatened to kill her. This man then brought the sword in front. He said that, did she bring you to protect her? And do you think that this will be protection? I will strike her right here, right now. At that point in time, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who stood for justice at every moment in time, we're told he drew his sword and he raised his voice. He elevated his voice. He says, do you not think that there is any justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth? Is there no justice of Allah on earth? That you can pull out your sword and threaten to attack a woman at any moment in time? Really? When he raised his voice at this point in time, the people began to come and surround and saw the situation at the gate of the house. When they saw this, they said, Salamu alaikum, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. When they began to say this, they all surrounded around him. At that point in time, this young man said, I didn't know. He became afraid. He said, Ya Ali, I'm Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. I didn't know that this was you. I didn't recognize you. I apologize. I'm sorry. He says, why do you terrorize this young lady? Why do you fill her heart with fear? Do you not know that there is justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one day? You may get away with it today. You may get away with it now. But there will be one day when someone is accountable, when you will be accountable before your Lord. Do not fill the hearts of man and women and the creation of Allah with fear. You will be liable on Yawm al-Qiyamah. At that point in time, look at the balance of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he says at that moment to the wife, he turns to her, he says, go with your husband. And at that time, he looks at the husband and says, do not yell at her. Do not shout at her. Do not threaten her where she is living in a state of fear. Be just, be fair, be equitable, be compassionate, show love, show care. And at the same time, at that moment when she's walking towards the husband, she says, you also make it a point to not say anything to upset him and enrage him. Look at the fairness, look at the equity, look at the balance. You know, sometimes when spouses get in arguments and have this dynamic, the one always knows how to push the buttons of the other. Whether it's the wife knows what buttons to push for the brother, or the brother knows which buttons to push for the sister. Whatever that statement, that nuclear button, they know how to press it. And when you press it, all hell breaks loose, so to speak, as the saying and the phrase goes. The argument becomes very big. Ali ibn Abi Talib is telling these two individuals that in Islam, husband and wife are meant to be mercy for one another. There's supposed to be love and compassion. There's supposed to be a libas for one another, a covering, a garment for one another. Mawadda wa rahma between the two. Don't make it such that there's such arguments. Ali ibn Abi Talib made sure that at every moment in time, there was equity in society, and he would never delay this. This was Ali ibn Abi Talib. He didn't go on to the leadership like some others who went to leadership, some of the first khulafa, just to be a leader in society and to be able to say that I'm a leader in society. Because Ali ibn Abi Talib, we're told he is patching his shoe at one moment in time. And his companion is standing by him, perhaps it's Ibn Abbas. He says that, what is the value of this shoe? This shoe that is worn, this shoe that is patched up, that I'm stitching together, what is the value of this shoe? He says there's no value. He says, Amir al-Mu'min says, by Allah, the value of this khilafah, of this seat, in my eyes, is less than the value of this shoe. This shoe has no value in my mind. If it were not that I needed to do this in order to establish the ummah, to establish the society, I would never have any care for it. That's why Abu al-Hasan, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he treated the ummah and the nation as if it was his own child. The nation, the ummah, was an orphan, and Ali ibn Abi Talib was its father. That's why he treated it in such a way. We're told there's a moment in time during the time of the first Khalifa Abu Bakr, there's a moment in time where a man comes forward and he has been accused of drinking. When he has been accused of drinking, they come forward and say that he must be given lashes. He has been accused of drinking, and therefore we must lash him, as is the order. At that point in time, the man began to say, I never heard the verse that prohibited alcohol. It never came to my ears. At that point in time, the rulership became perplexed. There was the first Khalifa and the second Khalifa, they didn't know what to do. They said that the ruling is this is the letter of the law, this is what it says. But at the same time, this man is saying he never heard. So is he liable? So one party is saying he must be given the lashes. The other party is saying no. There's a confusion that ensues. Whenever confusion ensued, they would go to the person who solved their matters. It was none other than Abu al-Hasan, Amir al-Mu'mineen. They went towards him to answer this. That the very famous saying that had it Lola Ali la halak al-Umar, that had it not been for Ali, that Umar would have perished. Because every instance Ali ibn Abi Talib came forward and assisted and helped at every moment in time. They called Ali ibn Abi Talib. They came, Ali ibn Abi Talib came, and then they asked, Ya Ali, this is the situation. He said, what's the situation? At once, this person has been convicted of drinking alcohol. At the same time, he's saying, I never heard the verses of the prohibition of alcohol. At that point in time, we're told that Ali ibn Abi Talib said, very well, I want to take some witnesses and I want to go together. Let us go to the market. They went to the market. And at the market, he said, the man said that I live in such and such neighborhood. Ali ibn Abi Talib says, where do you live? He said, I live here and here. He says, take me there. They went there. When they went there, Ali ibn Abi Talib went to his neighborhood, went to his locality. And he said, let's go to the market. They went to the market nearby. When they went to the market nearby, Ali ibn Abi Talib began to go to each shopkeeper. He said, Salamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. Do you know this man? He said, yes. He said, have you ever recited to him the verse of the prohibition of alcohol? He said, no. He said, okay, thank you. Next person, next shopkeeper. Salamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. Did you ever recite to this man the verse of the prohibition of alcohol? He said, no, I have not. He went to shopkeeper after shopkeeper. He went to person after person, asking, has anyone recited to this man the verse of the prohibition of alcohol? After that, all of the answers were in the negative. Ali ibn Abi Talib laid out a principle. He said, this man is to be forgiven. He is not to be given the punishment from this point in time. But he says at this point, I am reciting unto you the verse of the prohibition of alcohol. From this day forward, do not ever touch or come near alcohol. Because the man had said, I grew up in a neighborhood, in an environment where everyone is non-Muslims. There were Christians, there were Jews, there were others. They were not Muslims. So I drank because that was my environment. I didn't know. Ali ibn Abi Talib laid a principle. He said, trust but verify. He laid out a principle that he said, I take your word, you are innocent until proven guilty. So he went to the people, he asked for evidence, and he laid out a principle of justice for humanity. This was Ali ibn Abi Talib, the one who treated the nation as if it was his orphan child, and he was the father of this nation. This was the love. This was the compassion. This was the conviction of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen with respect to the nation and the civilization. Do you know how much Ali ibn Abi Talib loved the orphans? How much he looked after the orphans? He's on his deathbed, we are told. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam is with him. He's on his deathbed. And he says in the famous will, he says, Allah, Allah fil aitam. He says, by Allah, by Allah. This is a statement of emphasis. He says, by Allah, I tell you, do not neglect, do not forget the orphans. We're told there's a moment in time, Abu Tufail says, it's narrated that an amount of honey came from Hamadan and Huwais or Huwan. When this very, very luxurious honey came, Abu Tufail says, it was in these leather cases. When it was in these leather cases, they were brought in front of Ali ibn Abi Talib as a gift. When they were brought in front of Ali ibn Abi Talib as a gift, this was considered one of the luxurious gifts of the time, the most exquisite honey of society. It was placed in front of him. Ali ibn Abi Talib says, what is this that you've placed in front of me? They said, it is honey. It is from Hamadan. It is from some of the most unique places. It's some of the most beautiful honey. At that point in time, Ali ibn Abi Talib doesn't touch it. He says to Qambar, he says to his companions, he says, Abu Tufail, he says, the people nearby, go and call for me the orphans of Kufa. Call all of them in front of me. At that moment in time, they began to call the orphans of Kufa one by one, one by one. And Ali ibn Abi Talib said, sit all of them in a line together in front of me. They sat all of the orphans, the dignitaries who brought the gifts of honey. They were wondering what's about to happen. What's going to happen at this moment in time? At that moment, when all the children, all the orphans are seated, Abu Tufail says, I saw that Ali ibn Abi Talib, he took the first case of the honey, the leather case of honey. He removed the covering from the leather case of the honey, and he took his hand and he began to take the honey and he began to feed each of the orphans one after the other. He took one after the other. He fed each and every one of them honey. The first case finished. He picked up the second case. He began to feed each of the orphans. Abu Tufail says, and the companions say, we wished on that day that we were orphans so that we would be able to taste honey from the hands of Ali ibn Abi Talib. That their eyes were wet and showering from this thought that Ali ibn Abi Talib, not for one moment did Amir al-Mu'mineen think about himself. Not for one moment did he think about anything except the orphans, the poor, the widow, everyone who was marginalized in society. He had them at the forefront of his mind. This is how leadership should be. This is how governance should be. That the most downtrodden of society are taken care of. And those who are, for example, at the forefronts, they should be allowed to expand. but make sure that the poor, make sure that no one goes to sleep hungry. We're told that Alam al-Hilli in Kashf al-Yaqeen narrates there's a moment in time where Amir al-Mu'mineen, he receives news that there is a mother with her children. This mother is in such a state of poverty that she doesn't have enough food to feed her children. And in order to help her children go to sleep, she begins to play with her children. She begins to amuse her children. When she begins to play and amuse with her children, at that point in time, we're told that she begins to heat a pot of water. And she heats this pot of water on the stove, not because there's any food in it. There's no food in the pot of water, there's only water. But she wants her children to think that there is perhaps some soup or some food that is being cooked in the pot of water. And while she begins to play with the children, maybe they'll fall asleep and perhaps they'll forget about food. This news reached the ear of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, Qambar, come with me. He's ruling over the Islamic Empire. He's ruling over 50 plus states of the modern world. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he drops everything. He says, Qambar, come with me. He says, I've heard there's a mother who is trying to put her children to sleep. She doesn't have any food. And she's lit a pot so that there is a presumption and there's an illusion that the children think there's food. And there's no food for them. And she's trying to put them to sleep, but the children are crying of hunger. Qambar, come with me. Amir al-Mu'mineen, according to the tradition, he takes some bread, some flour, some rice, some fat, some shortening, some dates, and he puts it on his back. Qambar says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm your servant. Allow me to take this on my back. Just guide me where I need to go, I'll take it. He says, no, Qambar, I want to do this. This is my responsibility. He goes and they proceed towards the home of this lady. Amir al-Mu'mineen knocks on the door. Salamu alaykum, wa alaykum as-salam. At that point in time, Amir al-Mu'mineen asks for permission. He says, do we have the permission to enter? She says, very well, enter. At that point in time, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I've brought some food. I've brought some dates, some flour, some bread, some things for you and your family and your children. Do you allow me to help you? She says, very well. Amir al-Mu'mineen, we're told, he puts the rice into water pot and he puts some of the fat and he cooks it and he makes the rice for the children and he begins to feed them. At that point, he doesn't stop. When he moves forward, this is the graciousness, the love of a father. Amir al-Mu'mineen's love for the children, the orphans of Kufa and the orphans of the Republic. He said at this point, Qambar said, I was astonished of something. I was seeing a vision. What did Ali ibn Abi Talib do? He began to play with the children. He says when the children ate finally, they finally went to sleep. Ali ibn Abi Talib and Qambar left and they went back towards their home. When they were going back towards the home, Qambar said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, you knew that this lady was dying of hunger. She was starving. Her children were starving. You brought food for them. You wanted to make sure that they didn't cry. You brought them food. But I saw something strange, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. He said, what did you see? He says, I saw that you were playing with the children. You were showing love and affection to these children. You became a sort of, you allowed them to ride on your shoulders. You allowed them to have a smile with your face. At that point in time, we're told that Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Qambar, he says, Ya Qambar, I didn't only want to alleviate their starvation, I wanted to see a smile on their face. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is you who wanted to bring a smile to the face of the people. But what did the world do to you? We're told on the night after the 19th, after Ali ibn Abi Talib has been struck, after he has been struck on his head, we are told there's a moment in time that the doctors are brought. When after Amir al-Mu'mineen is brought home, they begin to notice that his skin color is becoming yellow. He is becoming affected by the poison that is seeping through his body, the poison that is seeping through his blood. When this happens, they call a physician, they call the doctor. When they call the doctor, we're told he takes the intestine of a sheep or the intestine of a goat and he begins to see how deep and what is the extent of the poison. He takes it and he puts it into the wound of Ali ibn Abi Talib and he removes it. When he removes it, he looks at it. At that moment, everyone is waiting for the verdict. What will they say? What will happen when he sees the result? When he sees what is there? At that point, it is only one thing to say, Inna lillahi lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We are from Allah and to Allah we shall return. At that point in time, we are told, the physician says, Ya Ali, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, the blood has seeped so much into your veins and so much into your body that there is no solution. There is only a prolongment perhaps, but the fate and the will is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At that moment, they began to ask and they began to call out. They said, is there something, perhaps there's anything we can do? Imagine you have a family member, a relative, and you've been told that it's a terminal matter. They'll be lost in a few days. You will ask for anything. You will plead and say, is there anything? Is there anything that we can do to try to solve this? Is there anything that perhaps can prolong this so we can have our father Amir al-Mu'mineen for a few more days? They are told at that moment that there is nothing to cure this, but perhaps if Amir al-Mu'mineen gets some milk, you can delay the death, you can prolong this period, and he will not be dead immediately, but he will live a few more days longer. Milk is the one thing that I can suggest. This news that milk can perhaps help Ali ibn Abi Talib, it began to spread throughout the city of Kufa. Do you know what happened? The heart breaks with what happens. They say there was a knock on the door when the news spread in Kufa that a glass of milk can help Ali ibn Abi Talib. They knocked on the door. They opened the door. Do you know who was behind the door? It was the orphan children of Kufa. They said, we heard our father Ali ibn Abi Talib. He doesn't have milk, and this is the one thing that can help him. We brought milk for our father, Abu al-Hasan. أجركم على الله أجركم على الله. The final moment. يا أبو الحسن يا أبو طراب يا أمير المؤمنين. When you were struck, there were the orphans of Kufa who came and gave you milk. I ask, on the night after Ashura, when they came to loot the tents of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Sukaina bint al-Hussein, she had some earrings and she had dry lips. There was no one to give her milk. There was only the strike of the enemy of Allah. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين اللهم لعن قتلة الأمير المؤمنين